Okay, on to the CPU, system board, and mini PCI Express. We're back at our dual-core laptop, and to get at those components, we need to take off the same hatch that we did for the RAM. So I'm going to disconnect all those screws now and remove that hatch. Before we remove the hatch, we need to disconnect the battery. Unlock that guy and pull him out now. And make sure that you have anti-static protection. Actually, it's static protection, but what have you. We'll take off the hatch now, and that will expose the guts of the computer. Previously, we removed the RAM sticks from here. Now we're going to focus in on the CPU, the system board, and the mini PCI Express card. So if we need to switch out the CPU, now in some cases with the mobile device you deal with, the CPU is integrated into the board. If that's the case, the whole board has to come out. And for this particular model, to get the board out, we have to get all this stuff out of here first before we can actually get at that board. And that's always the case. Any motherboard, you have to pull everything else out first. So we'll show the CPU first, and this one actually can be replaced, and in fact, it can be upgraded a couple notches on this particular laptop. But we have a bunch of screws we have to remove from the heatsink assembly. We've got 4 screws here for the main CPU, and then we have a couple screws here for the chipset combination here. And then we have the fan that connects to the system board. That's got to get disconnected. And then there's 2 screws on the fan that connect it to the heatsink. So we want to get those off too, so we can get that fan off and then get the whole heatsink assembly out of there. So back to unscrewing things. And I'll unscrew all those now. Now, quite often, one of the screws will be longer than the others, and you can see that here. And on this particular laptop, that was screwed in here. So you want to make a note of that. Where is the longer screw? Because that kind of holds things together a little bit more. Okay, so now we need to disconnect the fan. Pull that guy off the motherboard. Then the whole fan assembly can come out. That needs a cleaning. We'll do that with our compressed air. And then we can pull out this heatsink assembly. Okay, also needs a cleaning. Look at that. So we'll clean both of those out. Place that on the side. This is a pin grid array CPU, and it locks in with a little flathead screw. So we'll change out our screwdriver here, and we're going to undo that a little bit. And we'll go counterclockwise. There we go. That's it. It's only about a quarter turn. And then we can remove the CPU. Make sure you are again grounded and touch a grounding source before you remove it. But we can pull that guy out. He comes straight out. And there you have it. You can see the pin grid array on this guy. You can see all the pins. And you can see the pinholes where it connects. And you can also see where pin 1 is, that little arrow on the corner. And that tells you where to install it. Always hold the chip by the edges. Don't touch the pins. Don't touch here. Don't touch there. Just on the edges. But you can also see pin 1 here on the socket. And you can see that it's missing a pin. So you know that's pin 1. So if you do upgrade and put a new CPU in, it's got to be the same form factor. It's got to go into the same type of socket. And, because it's got to fit with the socket and with the heatsink. So when you install these, they are 0 insertion force. And so really they just drop into place. You don't need any pressure. There we go, it dropped in. You can push it down slightly, but no pressure needed. If you do use pressure, you could bend a pin, so you really got to be careful with that. And then we want to tighten the housing, tighten the socket for that. And that's just a quarter turn. And that's going to lock it in place. So there's your CPU. When you do remove the CPU, obviously put it inside an anti-static bag. You know, because you never know if you have to put it back in. Even if you're upgrading, you might want to hold on to that guy. And the other thing I wanted to show was the mini PCI Express card, and that's this guy here. This is for the wireless, and this has 3 connectors here that we need to remove if we want to take this out, and then the whole card just slides out. So again, touch a grounded source, and then we can unplug these. 1, 2, 3. And you may want to write down which is which. We got a black, a white, and a gray wire in that order. Then we need to unscrew the 2 screws here. And then we can pull the card out. We want to try to do it flat though. We don't want to have it on an angle if at all possible. Pull it out with even pressure, just holding from the edges. Okay, take a look at this guy. This is a mini PCI Express card, and this is for the Wi-Fi connection. And if we look really close on that, we'll see that it's a Intel Wireless Wi-Fi Link 4965 AGN card. So if this wireless goes bad, and these cards do go bad sometimes, you know, if the system had a surge or something like that, it could get damaged. You'd have to replace it with the same part, or you could think about upgrading and install an 802.11ac or something higher as time goes on. And on the CompTIA objectives, you also see mini PCI, the older version, and that's, you know, pretty much the same as this. It's just wider. You're not going to see those cards that often anymore, though. Chances are it's going to be mini PCI Express, and that's the size for that. And you got to note where the notch is when you reinstall. Just try not to touch any of the circuitry if it's even exposed. This has all the stickers on it. And don't touch any of the copper contacts on here. And you can see here, you know, we have to remove all this stuff to even get at the system board. And we also have to take off the rest of this plastic housing here, which is just a couple screws on this laptop. But we got to remove the RAM, we got to remove the CPU, the heatsink, the fan, the mini PCI Express card before you can even get to the system board. So replacing the system board is really the last thing you ever want to do, and hopefully none of you will have to do it, but you know, once in a while with an older laptop it may be necessary. So reinstalling these just goes back in reverse. Put that guy in, try to keep them flat, and use even pressure to connect that guy in the slot. Good. Then we'll screw that guy back in. And reconnect our 3 power connectors. Remember, in order: black, white, gray. Interestingly enough, the middle one, the white one, has a number 3 on it. So you'll see they're labeled on the card also. 1, 3, 2. And we can snap these into place. You may or may not hear an audible snap. Okay, so we're all connected back up. It's screwed in, and we have our 3 leads here connected, and we're all good to go with that. So we have Wi-Fi. Now we have a secondary port here. If this port fails, we can use this one for mini PCI Express as well. Or you could add on to it. Let's say the laptop doesn't have Bluetooth, or the Bluetooth chip failed, or what have you. You could add a card for that. You could add a card for GPS, for cellular connection, that type of thing. So pretty cool, mini PCI Express. In fact, you know, there's mini PCI Express video cards and all kinds of stuff. So there's a lot of different things you could add to that. So nice addition on this laptop, additional functionality there. And so now we need to put together everything again. We need to put our heatsink and fan back in and close it up. So I'll do that now. But that's about it for the CPU and the motherboard and the mini PCI Express on this device. I'll show one more laptop real quick. Okay, here we're back at our Toshiba laptop. This is a quad-core laptop, and here's the wireless card. This is actually smaller than a mini PCI Express. This is the M.2 form factor. It looks very similar, but it's smaller. And you can tell not only because of the small size, but if we pull back this rubber piece here, you'll see we only have 2 connectors for that guy instead of 3. And that's common now. This M.2 form factor is common with 802.11ac wireless cards. And so you need that small form factor for the newer laptops. So a little bit different, but it works the same way. It's different form factor, but connects the same way with the same power connectors, and transmits data through a port in the same way, and it gets inserted and removed the same way as well. M.2 in comparison to PCI mini PCI Express is going to be smaller. And we have our CPU here, and you can see the heatsink. To remove the CPU and the motherboard, we'd have to do 4 screws, get the heatsink out of there. Now, this actually attaches, so it becomes a little bit more difficult on this laptop. Generally, if you have a failure, you're going to remove the whole board and CPU most likely, because the CPU installation is going to be more difficult. But at least this board is easier to get out. This motherboard, once we pull this speaker off and move some of these things out of the way, like the heatsink, the whole board will come out pretty easily. But you do have to remove all these flex connectors. For example, the keyboard flex connector, and here's the touchpad flex connector, and you see others here. This is for the front lights. This is for the USB and out to HDMI. And you'll notice that they're labeled. They say MB on this end. That means that's the end of the flex cable that needs to connect to the motherboard, the MB. So always watch for that on each of these connectors, and make sure you don't flip them around, because they won't work properly if you do. And that's the case with just about any mobile device or laptop out there. You want to make sure that motherboard side is going to where the motherboard is, and the other end connects to the other secondary card or circuit board. But that's basically it. You've got some screws on the CPU to remove the heatsink. You've got a couple more screws here to remove for the motherboard. We need to get a lot of connectors disconnected and all those flex connectors, but that'll allow us to remove the entire board, and the model numbers here if we do need to replace it. So a little bit about CPUs, system boards, mini PCI Express on the other laptop, and M.2 form factor on this laptop for the newer 802.11 AC wireless cards. And that's about it for this sub-lesson and for the lesson on laptop hardware replacement. I hope you learned something about laptops, and I'll see you at the next lesson.